When I think about hellbenders, the thing that I always think about is what happens in a river in 1 year. If you go and look at a river off a bridge all year long and you see from the trickle of water in the summer when the water gets really warm and low oxygen and barely flowing, to the raging floods and ice sheets that go scraping through there in the winter, and you realize there's animals that are living in that 365 days a year. But not only that, they're living there 50 and 60 years, and they've been doing it for hundreds of thousands, millions of years possibly. And to me, that's just incredible. We portray amphibians oftentimes as very delicate creatures and the canary in the coal mine, but I reject that. It's quite the opposite. The truth is, these are incredibly resilient animals that have been around a lot longer than we have, and they can live through some incredible environmental conditions. And so when we see them declining, that's even more reason to be afraid. That's even more reason for us to be concerned and want to take action, because they've made it through a whole lot of bad things, and now they're declining. We should take heed. Hellbenders are the largest amphibian in Ohio, one of the largest amphibians in the world. They're a salamander. They're completely aquatic. They can grow up to about 26 inches long. They live in the water their entire life under very large rocks. We have one species, the eastern hellbender, and the Ozark hellbender, which is a subspecies that are found in the eastern United States. Well, what makes them really unique is just there's no other Cryptobranchidae, the hidden gilled salamanders, around. They're the last remaining species that has survived and made it this far. They have a really interesting life history. They spend most of their time underneath great big rocks where they feed on things like crayfish. They only come out when they need to find food, if there's not food coming to them, or to breed. And at that time they may come out and the male builds a nest and he actually fertilizes the eggs externally and protects that nest. And we don't actually know everything that's going on underneath that big rock with those eggs, but the male's taking care of them, protecting them from any kind of predators. They would be quickly gobbled up by crayfish and fish that would eat the eggs, but the male doesn't let anything near them, including other hellbenders. He's very protective. It's really kind of interesting. We don't think of parental care as something that occurs in animals that are this old. We usually think of that as something that higher primates do, but here's an animal that takes good care of its young. So one thing we know about hellbenders is they don't move very far from where they live. Hellbenders don't recolonize quickly. So they're really the ultimate water quality indicator. If hellbenders are living there, that means that water has been able to sustain hellbenders, not just now or the last year or two, but for many, many years, because hellbenders live a very long time, probably 50 years or over 50 years or more. So we know that by having hellbender population, they're really telling us a lot about water quality. The first surveys that were done in the state of Ohio occurred in 1985 to 1988 by Ralph Fingston. And in 2006, Ralph and I went back and revisited all of his sites to look at hellbender populations in the state of Ohio. And what we found was pretty disturbing. On average, we were seeing about 82% less hellbenders per person hour of searching in places where he found them in the 1980s. And this decline wasn't just across the board, everything was declining, but almost every population, what we saw was that the animals were getting larger and older, which was an indication that the way that they were declining is there was no youngsters coming in. There was no babies being recruited into the population. And this has been seen elsewhere in the range. We know this is how the decline happens. The babies aren't surviving, but we don't know exactly why. The leading theory behind this is that the young animals, the little larvae, are going down into the interstitial spaces of the gravel and the cobble bed. And that's where they make their homes and eat little bugs down there. The number one pollutant in waterways in the United States now is sediment from washing off of development and agricultural fields, and the sediment smothers that rock and cobble. So we think that the sediment is our biggest issue and the cause of the decline in most of our hellbender populations. The few places, and really there's only 2 places in Ohio where we still see young hellbenders, what we notice is they're in very forested areas where there's very little siltation or less than other areas. So most of the sediment comes from agricultural land uses, it comes from development, anything that disturbs the soil, and anything that removes natural vegetation like trees and grasses, which are very good at holding back sediment. But when those are stripped away, it allows sediment to wash in. What we also see is that when agriculture or development occurs right up to the banks of the stream and the vegetation right along the stream, the riparian vegetation is removed, we see that the stream banks oftentimes then start to fail, and you'll see large sections of the stream actually washing away, and that has the exact same effect as the soil washing off of a farm field. When we finished our surveys in 2009, we realized that in most places in Ohio, with only a couple of exceptions, hellbenders were going to be gone if we didn't do anything. The writing was on the wall. These are very old populations, old animals that are on their way out, and there's nobody coming in to replace them. We started the Ohio Hellbender Partnership, which is a partnership of zoos and aquariums throughout the state, universities, the Ohio Division of Wildlife, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Ohio EPA, lots and lots of different groups, the soil and water districts throughout the state where there's hellbenders. We came together to create a plan to reverse this decline. And the plan really has two objectives. The first objective is to start a captive rearing program, a Head Start program, where we collect eggs from the wild, raise them to an age where siltation isn't going to be as great a problem and predation isn't going to be as great a problem. After 3 years, we release those animals back into the wild to bolster populations or to bring back the hellbender where they used to be, but they've disappeared. The second objective is we need to restore and protect the watersheds we have. And this is where partners like our soil and water districts and our land trusts have been so incredibly helpful, because they can work with landowners to replant riparian forests, to hold back that soil, to deal with issues of stream bank stabilization, to work with landowners not to farm up to the edge. These are the things we need to do. And where we still have good hellbender habitat, protect that habitat. What can we do to make sure that habitat stays good and that water quality improvement is good for not just hellbenders, but everybody, including us? We released animals with radiotelemetry units in them the first 2 years, and we found that we had about 55% of them survive, which is actually a very good number for animals that have never been in the wild before and spent their younger years in captivity. So we're very hopeful. And I've also just been really excited by the connections we've made with landowners. One of the things I've learned is the people who live along creeks don't live there by accident. They bought the property because they love the creek, they love the river, and oftentimes they share the same values that we share in wanting to see the best for the river and the best for the creeks. And so by talking to them and figuring out how we can work together to achieve a common goal, and they take a lot of pride in it. I've been very impressed by the folks who have just been really prideful of the fact that they have an endangered hellbender living on their property, or their property is clean enough to have baby hellbenders from the Columbus and the Toledo zoos released back onto their property. The one thing that I'm certain of about hellbender recovery is there's no single person, no single agency, no single organization that is going to recover the hellbender. It's just too complex of an issue. There's too many factors, too many variables to affect change across the board. And we're dealing with watersheds. It's not like we can just lock up one little piece of land and everything's good. What happens upstream matters to the animals here. So we really need a watershed approach, and we need watershed coordinators that help us with that watershed approach. And making those connections with individual people and the choices that they make on the ground and how they treat their land and how they treat the water, that's what really matters. Conservation is not a wildlife problem. Conservation is a people problem. And if we really want to have an impact on the conservation of wildlife, we need to have an impact on people.